The nausea came in waves, and between waves I slept. That was how chemo went, at least for me, at least in those first few months. The infusion center was quiet on Tuesday afternoons, just the hum of the IV pump and whatever HGTV show was playing on the wall-mounted TV that nobody ever changed the channel on. I'd gotten into the habit of checking my phone between naps, mostly to respond to texts from people who wanted to say they were praying for me and didn't know what else to say. That Tuesday, 3 weeks into my second round of treatment, I opened my banking app out of habit more than purpose. I'd been tracking my savings balance the way some people track a flight, compulsively, even when nothing was changing. 32 years old, a registered nurse working pediatric oncology of all places, and I had spent 3 years building up that account with a focus that bordered on obsessive. My goal was $15,000, enough for a solid down payment on a small house in a neighborhood I'd had my eye on for the better part of a year. A 2-bedroom Craftsman on a tree-lined street about 4 miles from the hospital. I'd walked past it twice. I knew where the sun hit the front porch in the afternoon. The balance on my screen read $47.13. I thought my phone was glitching. I actually shook it, the way you shake something when you don't believe what you're seeing, which is a completely useless thing to do with a phone, but I did it anyway. The number didn't change. $47.13. I had gone into that Tuesday morning with $14,523. I'm telling this story because I still need to. Not because I'm angry anymore. I've moved past angry, which took longer than I expected, but because I know how many people are sitting somewhere right now, with a feeling they don't have a name for yet. The feeling that you are loved, technically, but not seen. That you are someone's daughter and someone's sister, and somehow still, in the moment you need it most, completely invisible. I know that feeling now in a way I didn't before, and I want you to know there's a word for it. There's a word, and there's a way through. But first, the $47. My name is Vanessa. I'm 33 now, and I want to start a little before the banking app, just so you understand what that number meant to me. I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer 14 months before all of this happened. Early enough to treat aggressively. Late enough that the word cancer stopped sounding abstract the moment my oncologist said it, and started sounding like something with my name on it. I did the surgery. I did the first round of chemo. I lost my hair in a bathroom in November while my boyfriend Nathan stood in the doorway and said nothing, because he understood that some moments don't need words. I went back to work part-time when I could. I kept saving. The savings account had been joint since college. My mother had added herself when I was 19 and newly at state, because she wanted to be able to transfer money if I ever needed it. It was practical then. I had never gotten around to removing her. The way you never get around to updating your beneficiary forms or rescheduling the dentist appointment you canceled back in March. It was just there, this small administrative leftover from the version of me that still needed her mother to bail her out. She hadn't needed to bail me out once, not once in 13 years. I called her from the recliner in the infusion center with the IV still in my arm. She picked up on the second ring, which she always does, because she is a woman who picks up the phone. Whatever else is true about her, that part has always been true. Mom, I said. My voice sounded more controlled than I expected. What happened to the savings account? There was a pause. Not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds, but long enough to tell me she knew exactly what I was calling about. Long enough to tell me this was not a surprise to her. Sweetheart, she started. That word. The way she said it, softer than her normal voice and with a little too much weight behind it. I had heard that version of sweetheart before. I'd heard it when I was 12 and she backed the car over my bike and hoped I wouldn't notice until she'd figured out what to say. I'd heard it my entire life in the moments, right before something I didn't want to hear. How much is left, Mom? There's enough to cover the month if. There's $47. Another pause. Then, I was going to talk to you about this. I just wanted to wait until you were feeling stronger. I almost laughed. I was sitting in a chemotherapy chair at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday because my body was fighting cancer, and my mother had decided that was not the right time to mention she had emptied my bank account. She had been waiting for me to feel stronger. That sentence has lived in my head ever since, and I still don't fully know what to do with it. Tell me what happened, I said. She told me. She told me in the particular tone she gets when she believes she made the right decision and is simply waiting for me to come around and agree. My brother, 27 years old, working sales at a car dealership, living in an apartment complex 40 minutes from my parents' house, had gotten into an accident in March, his second accident in 18 months. His car was totaled. He needed a vehicle to get to work, my mother explained, and without a car he would lose his job, and without his job he couldn't make rent, and if he lost his apartment, she and my father would have to cover that too. And so really, when you thought about it, helping him with the truck now was the more economical solution. He needed a down payment, she said. The dealer needed $8,000, and then there were some fees, and… You took $14,000, I said. There's $47 left. The rest went to first and last month at his new place. He had to move when the lease renewed and the new unit cost more and I stopped listening, not because I stopped caring, because I was doing something I used to do as a kid in the car when my parents argued in the front seat. I went very still and very quiet inside myself, behind glass, where the noise couldn't reach me as easily. My brother had never, in his 27 years on this earth, been expected to absorb a consequence the way I was expected to absorb this one. Nathan got to the hospital 20 minutes after I called him. He walked in still in his work clothes. He does project management for a commercial construction company and had been on a site that morning, and sat down in the empty recliner next to mine, without asking anyone whether that was allowed. He looked at my face, then at my phone in my hand, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Show me." I showed him the account history. He scrolled through it slowly. 13 withdrawals over 11 days. The first one happened the day I started my second treatment cycle, while I was in this exact chair. He handed the phone back and sat with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor the way he does when he is deciding something. "Okay," he said finally, "just that. I want to tell you about my family, because the savings account wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment the shape of things finally became too clear to look away from. My brother is the youngest by 5 years, and from the time he was born, the household rearranged itself around him the way a room rearranges itself around a piece of furniture that's simply too big for the space. Nobody decided to love him more. It was more like physics than preference. I was the one who got good grades without being asked, who got a job at 16, who applied for scholarships nobody in my family knew existed, because I'd researched them myself in the school library. I was the one who didn't need to be worried about, and somewhere along the way, doesn't need to be worried about, became, doesn't need to be considered at all. When I matched for the nursing program at State, my parents were at a family reunion 2 states away, and couldn't make it back in time for the ceremony. My mother called me from the road, happy and genuinely proud, and I told her it was fine, because it was fine in the way things are fine when you've already learned not to expect them. When I got my first nursing position, pediatric oncology, a placement I'd worked toward specifically, my father said, "That's wonderful, honey. Your brother's got an interview at the dealership next week. Say a prayer for him." I did. I always did. I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it matters that you understand. The savings account didn't come from nowhere. I built it the way I built everything, quietly, carefully, without anyone checking in on how I was doing it, because everyone had already decided I was fine. The night after the phone call, I lay in our apartment and looked at the ceiling and tried to locate my anger. The way you press on a bruise to find exactly where it hurts. It was there somewhere underneath the shock and underneath something quieter that I hadn't found a name for yet. Nathan had gone into the second bedroom, what used to be his home office and was now a small recovery room for me on bad treatment days, and I could hear him on the phone, voice low. I didn't ask who he was talking to. I already trusted him in the way where you don't need everything narrated. The next morning, I called my father. I needed to hear it from him directly. He is a practical man, someone who expresses love through action more than words. He showed up with groceries the week I started chemo without being asked. He's fixed my car, helped me move apartments, driven me to early morning appointments without complaint. So in some ways, I understood why he'd thought of the joint account as a resource. What I needed to understand was whether he had thought of me at all before deciding to use it. "Dad," I said, even one phone call, to ask. He was quiet for a moment, then, "You're already dealing with so much. Your mother and I didn't want to add to your stress. We just handled it." "You handled my money," I said. "We handled a family situation," he said, and his voice took on the edge it gets when he feels misunderstood. "Vanessa, you've always been the one who figures things out. You've never needed us to step in the way your brother does. We knew you'd land on your feet. He doesn't have your ability to manage things." There it was, out in the open, said almost gently, like it was a compliment. I had been left out of a decision about my own savings account because I was too capable to require consideration. I had been punished for being competent. I had spent 32 years building a life that asked nothing of anyone, and the reward for that was that when it actually mattered, when I was sick and sitting in a chemo chair, with a number in my head that meant a front porch and afternoon light and something that was finally mine, they took it. Because I would be fine. "I have cancer, Dad," I said. He didn't answer right away. "I've been in treatment for 14 months. I lost my hair. I've been working part-time because I physically cannot stand for 8 hours straight. I have not asked you or Mom for one single thing through any of it. And the one thing I had built for myself, you took it without asking me, for a truck. We're gonna pay you back," he said. "We just need a little time." I told him I wasn't done talking. And for the first time in my life, I felt something solid beneath that sentence, like I actually had the right to not be done yet. The weeks after that were strange the way only family situations can be. On the surface, everything looked normal. My mother called to check on my treatment. My brother texted me something funny on my birthday. We had Sunday dinners at my parents' house where nobody mentioned the account. And I sat there with my sweet tea and my still recovering body, and smiled in that particular way you smile when you are holding something enormous underneath a very calm surface. But underneath, things were moving. Nathan had done something in those first few days that he didn't tell me about until it was already done. He had a friend from college named Gideon. Not dramatic, not law enforcement, just a guy who passed the bar and now handles real estate transactions and the occasional family dispute. Nathan had coffee with Gideon and laid out the whole situation. Factually, the way you describe a structural problem to someone who can identify which codes were violated. Gideon told him that because the account was joint, my mother's withdrawals were technically legal, but he also told him that a written record of the transactions, combined with a formal restitution demand, created a paper trail that would be very uncomfortable to ignore if things needed to go further. He helped Nathan draft a letter, not threatening, not dramatic, just precise. Here is what happened. Here are the dates. Here's the total amount. Here's what accountability looks like going forward. Nathan told me all of this on a Wednesday evening in June, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, sliding a printed copy of the letter across the surface, like he was playing the calmest card in the calmest game I'd ever seen. I read it 3 times. "When does it go to them?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Your aunt's place, right? Big crowd?" I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about my aunt, my mother's older sister, a retired school teacher who has been calling things out loud and unfiltered since approximately 1987 and has never once apologized for it. I thought about the folding tables and paper plates and the way my family gathers around food, in a way they've never quite learned to gather around hard conversations. "You're having it delivered during the cookout," I said. "Certified mail, timed for 4 o'clock. The 4th came on a Thursday. I wore a yellow sundress. My hair was still growing back, short and close to my head, and I'd stopped being self-conscious about it somewhere around May. I brought a fruit salad and a box of sparklers for the kids. I hugged my aunt at the door and genuinely meant it. I had spent 33 years loving this family. That part was still true. My brother was there with his girlfriend, Kezia. She didn't know any of this. As far as she knew, the truck in the driveway was just a truck, the family was just a family. And the Tuesday in March, when my mother withdrew $14,000 from my account, was just a Tuesday that had nothing to do with her. I hugged my brother too, and I meant that in the complicated way, you mean something when you know exactly what it costs you. My father was at the grill. My mother was doing what she always does at gatherings, moving between every cluster of people, making sure everyone had what they needed, which has always been her love language, and which I have always genuinely appreciated. And which is also an efficient way to avoid staying in one place long enough for a difficult conversation to find you. The courier arrived at 4:15, right when the food was almost ready and the yard was full, and the kids were running through someone's sprinkler. My father answered the door still holding tongs, expecting extra ice, or a late grocery delivery my aunt had mentioned. He signed for the envelope with a pen from his shirt pocket, still half smiling from a joke someone had told him at the grill, and opened it right there in the doorway with a dozen people drifting in and out for air around him. I watched from my seat at the far end of the folding table. His face changed the way a face changes when it processes something it was not prepared to process. First he read, then he turned the page, then something passed across his expression that was closer to recognition than confusion. My mother appeared at his shoulder the way she always does when she senses something is wrong. She has always had a radar for his discomfort that I have never fully understood. She looked at the paper. She looked at me. My aunt, refilling her lemonade 2 feet away, caught the expression on both their faces and said, in her retired schoolteacher voice that carries approximately 40 feet in any direction, "What is that? What's the matter?" My mother said, "Nothing, we'll talk about it later." But my aunt had already caught sight of my name at the top of the letter. And my aunt is not a woman who has ever successfully waited until later, when something was happening right now. "Is that about Vanessa?" she said. She didn't lower her voice. Conversations softened around the yard, the way they do when something real is happening, and people are pretending not to notice while very much noticing. My father tried to fold the letter. He is not a subtle man, and the attempt accomplished nothing, except confirming to every person in eyeline that there was definitely something in that envelope he didn't want seen. "Dennis," my aunt said, using his full name the way family uses a name when they already suspect the answer and want it confirmed out loud. "I'm going to ask you directly, does that have something to do with what I think it has something to do with?" She had known. I hadn't told her, but she had known in the way older women in families always seem to know the thing no one has yet said out loud. My father didn't answer. My mother didn't answer. The quiet that settled over that yard was the specific quiet of a gathering when something real has finally surfaced. My parents pulled me into the kitchen. My brother followed. Kezia stood in the doorway, not sure whether she was supposed to be there, and clearly unable to make herself leave. My mother's voice was somewhere between pleading and defensive. "You could have come to us," she said. "If you needed help." "I didn't need help," I said. "I had money. $14,000 I saved over 3 years while I was going through treatment, while I was sick. You knew I was building towards something. You knew exactly what that account was for. We were going to. You were going to pay it back after the fact, without telling me, the same way you took it without telling me." I stopped and made myself breathe evenly. "Mom, I am your daughter. I have cancer. I have never asked you for one thing through any of this, not one. And you couldn't make a single phone call before you touched my savings." My brother stood in the corner with his eyes on the floor. He'd known where the money came from. I could see it in the way he was standing. The particular posture of someone absorbing a shame they've been carrying for a while and have just run out of places to put it. "I knew it was your account," he said to the floor more than to anyone in the room. "Mom told me when it happened. I said it wasn't right. I should have pushed harder. I should have called you myself instead of letting it go." He looked up. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I really am." It wasn't a fix, but it was real, and I knew the difference. My father set the letter down on the counter. He looked older than he had 3 hours ago, which is what tends to happen to people when they're finally seen clearly. "I told myself you'd be fine," he said. "I told myself you always land on your feet, and your brother needed us more right now, and that we'd sort out the rest later. I believed that when I said it." He shook his head slowly. "But that's not. I was wrong. I was wrong to let it happen and wrong not to call you first." "I need you to hear something," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had ever been when I spoke to them about something that mattered. "I am not the strong one. I am not the one who doesn't need you. I'm your daughter, and I've been in treatment for over a year, and I have never asked you for a single thing because I didn't want to be a burden. And you took that. You took my being capable and turned it into permission to leave me out. I need that to stop. I need to be in the room when decisions get made about my own life." I walked out of that kitchen. I said a real goodbye to my aunt. I thanked her without saying for what, and she understood. Nathan was waiting in the car in the driveway. He had not gone into the kitchen. He had understood that this was mine to do alone. I got in and we sat there for a minute, not saying anything. Then he reached over and held my hand, and I let myself cry for the first time since the infusion chair. Not from grief exactly, more from the feeling of something finally landing where it was always supposed to be. The months that followed were real life, which means they were uneven. My father called 4 days after the cookout and asked if he could come over. He sat at our kitchen table and handed me a check, not the full amount, because he didn't have all of it at once, but a significant portion with the remainder documented in a handwritten schedule on the back of an envelope. He didn't make a speech. He said he had been wrong, that the way he'd justified it to himself wasn't something he was proud of, and that he wanted to do better than he'd done. I accepted the check and the plan and told him honestly that the money wasn't actually the hardest part. My mother's apology came in pieces over the following weeks, the way her apologies have always come. Some of it clear and genuinely felt, some of it still wrapped around the reasoning she'd used at the time, as if she needed to keep some piece of the explanation intact. I took the clear parts. The rest I filed under things I've chosen not to carry. Healing doesn't arrive in one conversation. It comes in small, uneven moments spread across time, and at some point you have to decide what you're willing to tend. My brother and I had dinner alone in October, just the two of us at a Thai place near his new apartment. He'd started paying my parents back for the years of rent they'd covered. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he said he'd been thinking about what it meant that no one ever had. He said he didn't like what it said about who he'd been allowed to become, without anyone expecting anything different from him. I don't know yet who he'll be from here, but I believed him that night in a way I hadn't quite believed him before. Kezia texts me sometimes now. She told me she'd had some things to say to my brother privately, after the cookout, that she thought he needed to hear from someone who loved him and wasn't going to let it go. I believe her. She seems like someone who says the necessary thing. Nathan and I closed on the house in February. It's not the Craftsman I'd walked past twice on the tree-lined street. That one sold before I was in a position to move on it. But it's a 3-bedroom Cape Cod, 4 miles from the hospital. With a backyard I've already started planting things in, and a kitchen that gets morning light through the east window in a way I didn't know I needed until I saw it. The down payment came from the returned money, and what I'd managed to save, back in the months after everything came apart and slowly put itself back together. I stood in the empty living room, the night we got the keys, before we'd moved in a single chair, and thought about that Tuesday in the infusion center. The $47. The phone I'd shaken like shaking it would change the number. I thought about who I was before all of it, and who I was standing in that empty room, and they weren't the same person in ways I'm still figuring out. What I know is this: the people who love you can also fail to see you. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and holding that, really holding it without collapsing either side, is some of the hardest work there is. What you do with that knowledge is yours to decide. I chose to stop shrinking. I chose to take up exactly as much space as I need, and it turns out that's the thing no one can take from you, not even the people who have access to your bank account, not even the ones who raised you. If you made it all the way here, thank you. I mean that. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and I'd love to know, what would you have done in my place? I'll see you in the next story.